So greetings, everybody, and welcome to the 44th Forum on Tolerance, Black Lives Matter, the U.S. Journey to Justice in Healing. Thank you for joining us today. I am the chair of the Forum on Tolerance Committee, Laurie Carlson. I'm very excited to have so many of you at this event. There will be time to ask questions during this event. I'll ask people for questions. If you know that you have a question during the event, put it in the chat so we'll know to find you after. Otherwise, there'll also be a time for questions and answers. Questions should be, and remarks should be limited to 1 minute, and they should be respectful, but I think that probably is obvious to everybody. I have the pleasure tonight of also introducing our two speakers for today. Before I introduce them both as both wonderful colleagues and friends, I want you to know that they have given the keynote a run for his money. Our keynote speaker is like super famous and on CNN and like all those sports ball shows. But both Jen and Maria, all I said on the flyer was Jen and Maria with their names, no picture, no bio. And we've got 80 people who registered for this. So that's based on their popularity alone. So as I said, Dr. Square, Jen and Maria have both students, faculty, friends, and family and community members flock to see them. So Dr. Jennifer Harris, or Dr. J as her students know her, has been a professor of psychology at North Shore Community College for 23 years, which seems impossible because she's only 40. She earned her PhD in counseling psychology with a minor in sports psychology from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. Her scholarly interests are gender and women's studies and social identity development, and always takes a social cultural approach to teaching and learning. She is heavily involved in social justice initiatives at NSCC in addition to other college services. She loves animals and sports and athletics and spending time with her family and friends. She is also a wonderful housemate and an excellent auntie to my babies, both human and animal. Dr. Maria Del Mar Vazquez is an associate professor of psychology at North Shore Community College. She has been an advanced postdoctoral fellow at Lynn Community Health Center for the past few years. She received a PhD in clinical psychology from Carlos Albizu University, the San Juan campus. She is a proud Puerto Rican woman, a mom to both children and dogs, an excellent professor, and a wonderful friend and colleague. So without further ado, Jen and Maria.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you both so much. If you were at the previous talks with Dr. Dyson and Ricky Gant, I don't know that we'll be as animated as them, but hopefully we can throw in our special brand of humor to at least make you laugh a little bit during our presentation. So our presentation is on implicit bias. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and hope that I do not do anything wrong and share something that's not correct. All right. Am I cool here sharing the screen? You got it? Okay. Okay, so one of the things that I do want to make clear is that, and actually I'm going to stop sharing because I hate talking when there's just a slide up there, that Maria and I both are psychologists. So this talk is very much from a psychological perspective. Our friend and colleague, Dr. Carlos Marin, also has done this workshop with us and added in the sociological perspective, but just understand that we are really coming from a psychological perspective as opposed to a sociological or anthropological or literature or history perspective. So we'll go back to our notes. So, all right, I just want you guys to read this. I want you all to read this. Actually, I'll read it out loud, and then if you'd like, you can put your responses in the chat. A father and son have a car accident and are both badly hurt. They're both taken to separate hospitals. When the boy is taken in for an operation, the surgeon says, "I cannot do the surgery because this is my son." How is this possible? So if you want, you can just put in the chat what you think. Probably giving it away for some people.
I think.
What did you get? I for reasons I can't see the chat, Maria. So
I think they all got, the ones that have responded already have it. They got it. The mom.
okay.
Yep.
So you probably, what did they say, Maria?
So first one was the mom. Let me go back. Surgeon is the mom. That was Vanessa Ruggett. Paula Morgan said it's the boy's mother. Michelle Harris agrees, yes. Dr. Vanessa Mullins says yes. Doctor is the mom by Sharon Dirac. So yeah.
Yes. So you, and it's interesting because some of you probably have had this brought to your attention. I know that the first time I heard this was back in the late 80s, and it made people struggle. People struggled with, well, how could it be? But we have a bias that men are doctors or that doctors are men, which would have you not be able to problem solve this question because of these biases that we have. So that's just an example there. So I want to ask, and Maria, I'm going to ask you again to help out with the chat. What do you know about implicit biases? And then further on, what misconceptions do you have about implicit bias, or ideas that you think might be misconceptions? So we'll give you some time to put something in the chat.
All right, so nothing yet. I guess the answers are being very well thought out.
Okay.
All right. So, first answer.
Yes.
We are unaware of them and they're hard to change. Second answer, I don't know what implicit bias was, so I figured that was a signal that I should come to this training. Yay.
Yes.
People assume that all Spanish people like spicy food. Yes, and that is not true. We are often unaware of many of our implicit biases. Implicit bias are based that are bias that are unconscious that you are unaware of. Implicit bias is deep rooted. Awesome. All awesome.
You know what? I think we're done, Maria. I don't think we have to go any further because clearly you all just did my whole, at least you did my talk. I'm just going to turn it over to Maria now. Just playing. So yes, much of what you are saying there is true. So just to illustrate a little bit and as an introduction to defining implicit bias, I have a video that I probably should have called up before I did this. So if you wouldn't mind giving me just
And Jen, I don't want to interrupt you. I just want you to know that it's really hard to see the box. When you share your screen, you have to check share the audio to, or it won't share the sound.
Okay, wait, what do I got to do?
When you go to share screen, there's a small box that says share audio to that you have to check.
All right. Well, I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute anyway, so I can go get to this video. And then, so you're saying when I say share, when I share my screen.
So you just have to look, there's a little box that you have to check.
It says share computer sound. Got it. Got it. Okay, here's just a little video to introduce the definition of implicit bias.
Implicit bias.
2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times, when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style racist.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to biases.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm gonna say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being paired together.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent and aggressive and not to be trusted, that they're criminals, that they're thugs.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook, but in some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem.
Okay. So that's just a nice am I still with you all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's just an introduction about defining implicit bias. Let me pull out some of the concepts that were addressed in that video. Like somebody said, implicit bias are unconscious, automatic thoughts, ideas, or beliefs. They are not in and them of themselves racist or sexist or homophobic or classist. They aren't bad in and of themselves. They are actually quite natural for all of us to have. And that's what we'll be talking about in a minute, that they are a natural cognitive mechanism that we all have. These are unconscious and automatic. So we are typically not aware of what these implicit biases are. And again, to the point of that, they aren't inherently discriminatory or prejudice because we all have them. We all do them. All of us have implicit biases. They often can be very different from our conscious attitudes and beliefs, but they do have an effect on our behavior. These unconscious and automatic ideas and attitudes do influence our behavior, even though they are not at the conscious level. But the good news is that they can be adjusted or unlearned. Because they are learned and they are developed through our experiences. They can also be undone through our experiences. Some myths about implicit bias, that if you have diverse friends, I'm not biased, I have diverse friends and I believe in equal treatment. Well, again, we all have implicit biases, and they, again, can be very different from what you consciously believe. You may consciously believe in equal treatment, but then, say for example, I could believe in that, that I don't believe in classism. I believe that there should be equality in our economic system, but then question why my taxes are raised for social services. That may be a implicit bias I have against poor and working class people. I am fully aware of my thoughts and actions and will make all of my decisions based on facts and evidence. Therefore, implicit bias does not affect my behavior. Again, that's just not true. Unconscious or implicit biases are natural. Yes.
And we're seeing the video, we're not seeing the slides. So
no.
Yeah.
Okay, let me stop sharing that. And then I thought I could just go back to that. So, okay.
Awesome.
There you go. That yes, you can think of yourself as a rational, reasonable person. That does not that does not negate the fact that you have these unconscious processes that affect the way that you interpret the world, see the world, and then behave and act in the world. And in fact, having an attitude like this, that I am just this rational, reasonable person, may actually make you more susceptible to being victim, if you will, to implicit biases, because you won't question them. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit later. I didn't say this, by the way. This wasn't my thing. I just got this from somewhere. I don't believe this. I am Black. I can't have biases against Black people. I'm also a woman, so it doesn't make sense that I would have implicit biases against my own sex or my own race. Again, implicit biases comes from our experiences in our lives and in our world. And for example, if you are a Black person and you grow up in a racist, if I'm a Black woman and I have grown up in a racist, sexist society, there is a very high likelihood that those thoughts and attitudes were indoctrinated in me as well. In the video, the woman talks about it as a fog, that these attitudes are a fog. Well, if I live in the United States of America, I've walked through the same fog that everybody else has. So do not be shocked when people of color have implicit biases against other people of color. Again, women have implicit biases against other women, because we all grew up in the same fog or soup that influenced and informed those unconscious attitudes and beliefs. All right. So what we're talking about here is what social psychologists call social cognitions. Our social cognition process contributes to implicit biases. So what is social cognition? Social cognition is how we think about one another, how we interpret our world, how we analyze information, and how we use that information to interact in our social world. How do we use that information to get along with other people? Now, there are a variety of mental processes that go along with social cognition. This isn't a social psychology class, so I won't go through in detail, but concepts like perception and judgment. If you took Intro to Psych, you may have learned about Gestalt laws of organizing. These are the types of processes that contribute to our implicit biases. Now, they're very, very efficient and adaptive. We need them. We need these social cognitions to operate in the world in an efficient manner. However, because they are, they're very automatic and ingrained, they tend to sometimes lead to erroneous outcomes. They can be very error prone. So that's what we're going to talk about. Sometimes that's the error comes in with the implicit biases. Now, these cognitions are formed, as the video said, by our associations, the things that we associate through our socialization, through your upbringing, through the things that you learn in your families, in your churches, from the media, in schools. All of those socializations influence how we perceive the world, how we judge things, the information we can recall, and how we interpret our world. Now, a very close concept, our social cognitive concept, is automatic versus controlled cognitive processes. It means kind of what it says. Our automatic processes are, again, these cognitive processes that happen automatically. They are involuntary, unintentional, and unconscious. That information often goes unquestioned. So we develop these assumptions based on these automatic thinking that go unquestioned, and they can influence how we perceive and judge the world. For example, there is, and if I only got it questioned when I saw a video that questioned it. but we have sort of automatic thinking or automatic thought that girls are more emotional than boys, that girls are, have much more emotions than boys. Well, research and my experience with Laurie's babies at their smash birthday party suggests that this is not the case. There's research that's been done that shows that girls actually are not as emotional as boys are. At our at the smash birthday party, Laurie has two twin babies, my little niece and nephew, and they're doing their smash cake and they're trying to get in the cake, although they like the grass much more. And our neighbor was leaf blowing. Blake was a mess, crying, whining. Wah. Gail decided she thought it was fun to face plant into the blanket over and over and over again. She wasn't phased. It didn't bother her. We have this assumption, this automatic thinking that girls are more emotional, and we will interpret behaviors as, oh my gosh, that girl is just being really emotional. Gail face planting, she's so emotional, and look at how strong Blake is by crying at the leaf blower. But these automatic processes, again, inform our judgments and our perceptions, and thus influence our behavior. Now, control processes is what we all hope that we have. This is what we think we are doing. We are processing information very deliberately, very consciously. We're being very rational and reasoned. And I'm not saying that we don't do that, but to think that that's all we are limits your understanding of what is actually motivating your behavior. So automatic processing gets influenced by our intuition. Again, and I am not saying intuition is bad. Please do not misunderstand me. But sometimes our intuition doesn't get questioned, and then we react without analysis, and that contributes to our automatic processing. There's also Gestalt laws of organization. And this is a principle that says we organize bits of information into meaningful wholes, so that if we have some ambiguous stimuli, we fill in the gaps to make sense of it. But the information we use to fill in the gaps are often these implicit biases that we have. So just for an example, it says, that you could probably read this paragraph, even though if you look closely, red is spelled R-A-E-D, but your mind automatically makes it into red because that's what we've been used to. We are expecting to see red in the context of this paragraph. So we see red instead of going, oh, if you can't, what is that word? Now, there's a good point here about automatic processes and implicit biases, but especially automatic processing and these cognitive mechanisms, why they aren't bad. Do you see how important it is to be able to fill in the gaps sometimes when there's a situation that we are not familiar with? If I go to a concert, say, and although I've never been to the venue, I don't know the band, it's helpful for me to know, okay, we're going to wait a little while for the band to get on there. There might be a band that comes beforehand. If I go up close, it might be loud. All of those things are implicit biases about the venue, but they can be pretty accurate. Again, the problem comes in is when they are not accurate. So, what's the connection with automatic thinking and implicit bias? Automatic thinking goes unquestioned. We don't question these automatic thoughts. They therefore can lead to implicit biases. Sorry about the misspelling on impact. And these automatic thinkings impact our decisions and our behaviors, which can lead to discriminatory decisions and behaviors. Which again is unintended. if we have a bias, say for example, that Black men are violent, and that's part of our automatic thinking, that's going to cause, you know, say for example, a police officer to be more aggressive with that Black man. Again, not even consciously thinking about that, but lead that officer to be more aggressive to the Black man because of this implicit bias that went unquestioned. Also, our automatic thinking can be much more predictive of our behavior than our conscious thought. Again, because it's automatic, right? If something is happening very quickly, we're going to rely on those automatic thinkings, not on our conscious thought. So these automatic thoughts need to be explored, especially when they don't align with our conscious or explicit beliefs. Let's see. The video talked about association, so I'm not going to go into depth here. But that again, our implicit biases are formed by associations that we make as we grow up. If you grew up in a community where, say for example, the only experience you had with Latinx culture was the Mexican restaurant down the street, and the Mexican restaurant down the street had spicy food, you might associate then spicy food with Latinx people because that was the association that was made in your experience and in your socialization. Now, again, we have all sorts of associations, peanut butter and jelly, that are harmless, absolutely harmless. But again, if we are associating women with weak, that's going to influence your interpretation and your perception of women as weak, and when the woman is not weak. So even if the woman is not weak, again, you might perceive the woman as weak because of that association that you developed. Implicit bias often influences our perception, how we see the world. Perception is based on two things: observation and interpretation. We observe the world, we see what's happening, but part of that perception is our interpretation. Your interpretation is largely informed by your associations and your automatic thinking. So again, your perception of something is going to be influenced by your implicit bias. So again, I could see Blake on the rug crying and think, wow, you know, he's very emotional. Somebody might look at it and say, wow, he's just really expressing himself, right? Their perception, if their bias is boys are strong and assertive, is when he cries, he's just asserting himself. I might see it, because I have challenged my assumptions, as Blake being emotional. Are you happy, Laurie, that I got to put Blake and Gail several times in this lecture? I try every time I speak, by the way.
Yes, I am.
Some particular cognitive processes that really can contribute to implicit bias are schemas and heuristics. And again, I'm not going to go into great detail because this is in a social psych class, but I want to just give you a understanding, a general understanding. Schemas are frameworks that we use to understand the world around us. That too, like our automatic thoughts, are created through our experiences and socializations. And again, if you have a certain schema about the world, it's going to influence how you interact with people. So just for example, if you have a schema of meritocracy, right? That we live in a society that is based completely on your merit and hard work, you might then judge people who aren't successful as they're just lazy, they're not trying hard, they're not working hard enough, where your schema may be flawed. The schema of meritocracy may not be actually true. It may be that we live in a society that's actually set up as a hierarchy with inequities. So people who aren't doing, say, financially well as other people might be working very, very hard, but for other reasons, they aren't higher on the social ladder. Heuristics are another cognitive mechanism that we use, and we use them very well. They are quick and dirty ways for us to assess an information and draw conclusions. However, there are certain heuristics that contribute to biased thinking. They're representative and availability heuristics. Representative heuristics are when we use the information that we have to make a judgment. So again, if you lived in a, if you say had no experience with Black people and all that you saw about Black people were on TV, you might have a representative heuristic, especially if you grew up in the 70s and watched Good Times, like I did. You would have a representative heuristic that all Black people are poor and live in the ghetto. Now, that's not true, but that's the information that you have. You would make judgments based on that limited information about people. Availability heuristics are like stereotypes. Oh no, excuse me. Let's switch that. Representative heuristics is stereotypes, availability heuristics. In my class, I start with availability heuristics. That's why I just went on there. But representative heuristics are like stereotypes. We have information about a group of people, and we apply that information to a group of people, to the individuals that you meet. So there's a representative heuristic that, you know, Black people like rap music. And when I was in college, I didn't like rap music. I didn't even know rap music, but everybody just assumed because I was Black that I liked rap music. You know, I liked alternative music. I like new wave. But we use those heuristics, those natural cognitive mechanisms to make judgments that may be erroneous. And again, I want to make the point that for the most part, these things work very well in our day-to-day lives. So in summary, and I think I can quickly do this, implicit biases are informed by these automatic cognitive processes that are natural. We use them every day, and we use them to help us adapt and react very quickly in our daily lives. They're very, very helpful. The problem comes is when you use them unquestioned. When they do not become questioned, you do not explore them at a conscious level. They really have nothing to do with intelligence or kindness. The fact that you are operating an implicit bias does not mean you're a mean, insensitive person. It really doesn't have to do with that. But it really does say that you have some ideas that have gone unquestioned. So I'm going to stop my part there and see if there are any questions or comments. Laurie, Maria, anything?
I just want to say that when I was in high school, I was into folk music, and people were totally caught off guard by that.
Yeah, because we have this, you know, representative heuristic, this idea, this implicit bias that Black people could not possibly like folk music. Now, again, there might not be a lot, but it doesn't, when we have that bias, we then negate the individual person. That if we don't question those biases, we then dismiss, say, Michelle, your experience as an anomaly, right? That you were just some weird Black person that liked folk music, when the problem wasn't you. The problem was the implicit bias, the representative heuristic. All right. Oh, go ahead. I see Wanda's hand, but I can't see everybody, so.
So you just got me thinking with Michelle's story there. I was on a fire department years ago as an EMT, and people used to always just assume because I'm short and I'm a woman that there's no way I could have worked on the ambulance, but I did so for 12 years. So it kind of got me thinking about that, how people just make assumptions based on what you look like.
Exactly, exactly. And when those, again, when they go unquestioned is when the problem comes. Like if somebody said, oh, Wanda, you know, I just thought that because, you know, short women couldn't do that. Well, I guess my, you know, my ideas were wrong. My assumptions were wrong. Most people don't do that. But that's for Maria's talk.
I have a question, Dr. Harris, about the kind of what you're talking about with biases. So am I right that what you're saying is we have these sort of cognitive shortcuts that we use, and they can be used, and we just use them? That's like, am I right that that's not, you're not sort of making a value judgment on that on broadly? We just use these as human beings. But the problem becomes when we rely on them and kind of don't question them. Is that what it is? Or how do you know that you're not following the right cognitive shortcut? You know what I mean?
Excellent, actually, excellent point, Chris. Here's the thing, this is what I talk to with my students is, what do you do when faced with evidence to the contrary of your implicit bias? And typically that's when you know you had an implicit bias. You know, I'm from the North, and although my family's from the South, and I went to school at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, which is south of the Mason-Dixon line. Lots of people had Southern accents, including my professors. I'd never had a professor with a Southern accent before. And I remember struggling because at first I was like, wait, how is a professor having a Southern accent? And I was like, wow, they're really smart for somebody with a Southern accent. Not realizing I clearly have this implicit bias that people with Southern accents are stupid. Had I not had that experience, I wouldn't have even known that that was an implicit bias that I had. But I was faced with some evidence to the that blew my expectations, Chris. That blew my expectations. So then I had to go and analyze. Wait, I really thought that Southern people with Southern accents were stupid. So I think that's what happens. And that's the problem is, how does it influence your behavior? And what do you do when that implicit bias is challenged?
Can I chime in?
Chime in and take it away.
All right, so to answer Chris's question, there are two types of thought processing, right? And this is the basic thing. Whether you look at it from a behaviorist perspective or a cognitive perspective, your brain makes these associations that are quick, that have no time for judgment. And those are what we call intuition. And these are the easiest ones to go to, right? And these are they're learned from our environment. The minute that you come in and you think more and you reason, that takes time. So you won't really kind of do those associations and that thinking unless you really think about it. So it's called dual processing theory in cognitive psychology, which is really interesting. And that's where implicit biases come. It's like the first time that you drove a car, right? What were you doing when you were driving a car? You were learning how to drive a car. And it was hard because you had to put your leg and measure how much that accelerator could go, how much to hit the brake. Then eventually, even though that's more of a muscle skill, you learned it. And now you know how, if for whoever drives, you get in a car, you can drive, and now you know how to do it. And it becomes not an explicit process, more of an implicit process. So implicit biases come in as these implicit processes that, not bad or good, that we do. I don't know if I'm being redundant, but.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
All right. So am I ready to go?
Actually, Maria, can I just add, I'm just going to add something. I'm going to start sharing my screen so then we can go directly to you. But I did want to, because Chris, you made a point that I missed something, that, you know, when we use, this was to your point, Maria, did I do it right? Did it share the audio too, or
yes.
no?
Maybe
okay.
do the slideshow, share current slide. If you click on slideshow and then do share current slide.
Yep.
There you go. Awesome.
That we use implicit bias, to Maria's point, when we are fatigued, distracted, we have time pressure, because as Maria said, these are automatic. They happen automatically. So just understand that, you know, when you're under pressure, when you have to think quickly, you're actually going to rely much more on these implicit biases than you would otherwise. Okay. All right.
All right, so that's me, right? Yay.
Yes.
All right, so let's talk about the biasing, right? So now I think at this point, Dr. Harris, Jen has done a really good job of explaining how we have these implicit biases and how they're formed. So how do we fix them? And my question to you, and you can write on the chat, is how do you debias? Does anybody know? How do we prevent a negative implicit bias? You can write your answer on the chat.
And Maria, you probably going to have to answer your own chats or let Laurie do it, because I can't see the chat.
That's fine. All right, so I have start with awareness. Very good. Greater exposure and experience. Awesome. You have to become aware of them first. Yep. Challenge our assumptions. Very good. We can put ourselves in situations that are out of our normal. Excellent. Education and questioning. Oh my goodness. Learning more about the situation that we are biased about. Getting out of our comfort zone and interacting with people from the other group. Very good. These are all awesome. I think my presentation is done. No, just kidding. All right. Thank you guys, right? We have a really educated group of people here. That's awesome. All right, so let me get to my presentation, but these all look really awesome. So how do we debias? Yes, we debias by reducing bias by interrupting automatic response patterns. If you can change, and this is the logic behind it, if you can change biases at the individual level, then you can change biases at the organizational level. So it has to start from the individual level. I mean, it doesn't matter where it starts as long as it starts. But if you go from the individual, then you can get to the organizational, to the higher level, the macro level, with enough awareness, motivation, and effort. And I'm going to explain this in a lot more detail. So thank you, Jen. And what is the importance of debiasing, if it's not already obvious? In this group, I'm sure it is. These implicit biases affect our decision-making processes in many of our systems, from the individual to the organizational level, in institutions as important as healthcare, judicial system, education, and so forth. So, I mean, we are all individuals. We all work in these systems. And the minute that the implicit biases affect the individual, the systems are affected, as in with doctors, in emergency room, in the courtroom. So this is pretty serious, more so than just the individual using implicit biases. All right, so let's talk about the risk factors, right? So research has been done that shows when we are more likely to use this automatic system. And I know that Jen touched upon it a little bit, but let's go for it. So when we are under certain emotional states, such as anger or disgust, you don't really think, you don't really reason. So we will resort to this automatic, more intuitive type of thought that is when we're going to use more implicit biases. The other risk factor that I mentioned here is ambiguity. In situations that are vague, right? What do? What does the brain do? We go back to what we know to make sense of the stimulus of the situation that we are in. And this is when we use our automatic thought processes. A third one is called our salient social categories, right? If you see a person, right, an individual, and you can identify their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, their gender, their sex, in that sense, you are more likely, because these characteristics are more salient, to actually use your implicit biases, right? So we need to be aware of the risk factors so that we can start combating our implicit biases. And there's more. All right, so sometimes we use low effort cognitive processes when the individual does not engage in more elaborative thought processing strategies, metacognitive strategies such as introspection. And I know there's a little mistake there with the comma and the period. I apologize for that for all the English teachers watching this. But anyway, what does that mean? Sometimes we're not using our brains to full capacity, and it doesn't make us any smarter. It doesn't change our IQ. It just means that we are just barely using our cognitive processes and we're not reasoning. So we're more on this intuitive type of frame of mind. Introspection. I think that, thank you, Laurie. I think that if most people used introspection, and introspection is when you think about how you've acted, what you've said, or metacognitive strategies, which is thinking about your own thoughts and your own cognitive processes, psychologists would be out of a job, right? That's just my personal opinion. I'd be poor. But you need to think about your actions, your cognitive processes, and bring awareness. And one of the most important times when, or risk factor for using implicit biases is when you are distracted or pressured decision-making situations. And when you've been working long hours, when you're tired, when you're fatigued, when you're in an emergency situation, right? So I bring it back to an emergency situation where you're at the hospital and you have a doctor or a psychologist that is treating a patient. You're tired, you're not thinking, and that's when these implicit biases, and not good ones, the negative ones, may arise. And another risk factor is lack of feedback, right? When there is nothing to give you feedback or to check on the individual, then we're more prone to use implicit biases. Okay, so how do we debias? What are the actual strategies? And they kind of go hand in hand with the risk factors. So awareness. Sometimes we just go about our daily lives and we're not aware of our cognitive processes, how we think, how we not think, especially when you don't have to, right? If you've never been questioned about your ethnicity, you're not going to think about your ethnicity. If you are, then you're going to start thinking and identifying and so forth. So at the individual level, you want to seek out information to create awareness. At the organizational level, you want to do training. And that's how we tackle. This is how we start tackling debiasing. So seek to identify and consciously acknowledge real group differences. And what does that mean, right? And we've talked about I don't think we've talked about it in this forum, but color blindness, right? A lot of people say, I don't see color. That's actually not a good strategy because that's actually more prone to creating implicit biases, right? But on the other hand, sometimes you don't want to put your perspective on the other person. So my strategy has always been to ask, listen, stop and listen, but seek to identify the real good group differences, what the other person is saying. Routinely check your own process of reasoning. Routinely think of what you've done. You know, we all make mistakes. We've all said really silly things at one point or another. And as long as we recognize, we create awareness of them, then we actually can change them. Identify distractions and sources of stress in the decision-making environment and reduce or remove them, right? So I'll give you an example. I sometimes have to diagnose a patient in 40 minutes. How can I do that? Is that really fair? Don't you think my implicit biases are going to come into play there? So I want to take my time and think about it and see it from all different angles so that I can reduce these automatic types of thinking. And sometimes, you know, it happens with a student, it happens with a patient. You're thinking about it and then you think a little bit more and then maybe there's more stuff. There's always more to the story. Identify sources of ambiguity in the decision-making process. So where are these vague spots, right, in our decision-making process and strive to change them. Institute feedback mechanisms, right? What is feedback? I think one of the best things that I have, because I'm still not licensed in the state of Massachusetts as a psychologist, is my supervision, because it's feedback, right? Because I don't know everything. And it stops you from this automatic thinking that we all tend to do. at North Shore Community College, I'd say that the biggest feedback system is our colleagues, right? We sit, we talk, we discuss, and that's how we change, and we can actually attack these implicit biases and start changing the way that we think. And then the last one, I'm going to mention more, sorry, but increase our exposure to stigmatized groups, all right? We need to do this, especially if we don't live in a neighborhood that's diverse. You want to seek diversity. And when I say diversity, go and talk to people. Don't be afraid. Face your fears. Go talk to people. See, I'm not shy. I know that some people are more shy, but I like to talk to people. I will sit there and just randomly ask questions. And some people think I'm a little bit cuckoo, but that's okay. I am. Just don't tell anyone. But you need to talk. You need to understand the different perspectives. Thank you, Jen. And I just want to go through these pretty quickly, but there have been these trainings that have been created for debiasing, right? So I'm going to walk pretty quickly through these, but these programs are specifically designed to reduce biases. And they've worked in some cases, but what actually Jen and I were talking about when we sat to talk about this presentation is that it's not a one-time thing. Everything in life, I don't know if you figured it out by now, is a process, right? We can't expect to learn about this today and then implement it by tomorrow and be the most debiased person, because trust me, that's not going to happen. It's a process, and we need to be okay with it being a process. But nonetheless, there are trainings that do say that they can change the implicit biases. So these programs are designed with the purpose of exposing individuals to their unconscious biases, providing tools to adjust automatic patterns of thinking, reducing and hopefully eliminating negative implicit biases. These programs attempt to reduce implicit bias by, first, giving a pretest to assess baseline implicit biases, second, completing unconscious bias training task, and then third, taking a post-test to reevaluate bias levels after training. And when these programs are done, of course, you need sort of a control, which is the second little flow chart that I have there for you guys. All right. Thank you, Jen. So one of these programs yielded these actual strategies that were, I mean, the other ones came from the literature. These are the actual ones that Devine et al. Carried out a 12-week prejudice habit breaking intervention and was able to produce long-term reductions in implicit racial bias. Okay, so we're going to be more specific and talk about racial biases. So you know what, Jen, why don't we just go through that slide, because I'm going to explain them all one by one. So.
Oh, wait. You want me to go? Oh, okay, yeah.
You're good. Thank you. Okay, so stereotype replacement. All right. So stereotypes. We all have our stereotypes, and they can be confusing because the next one is called counter stereotyping. Stereotype replacement strategy is when you start to recognize and identify the stereotypes that you have. Right. It's more a process of identifying those stereotypes and then trying to replace them. All right. So how do we identify our stereotypes?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Don't worry. I think you're good. Counter stereotype training, it actually involves really creating a contrary stereotype. So now you're actually creating images, seeking for information to create a contrary stereotype. And I'm going to go with the spicy food example. If you're Spanish, right? The assumption is that we all are food. First of all, that all Hispanic food is the same, which is not true, not even close. And second of all, how would you go about untraining that? What would you answer to that? You educate, you don't get mad, and I would say, well, Puerto Rican food is actually not spicy at all. Okay, so counter stereotype training is going against the standard mental picture, more specific and using imagery, right? So one of the examples that I talk about all the time with my students, with my patients.
So sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Maria. For some reason,
You want me to hurry up? Is that what it is?
No, not at all. Okay. Counter stereotyping. Okay.
Okay. All individuals that speak Spanish are illegal immigrants, right? Have we heard this one before? Have we? How do we counter this? Is this true? Why is it that Spanish speakers, and maybe I have a personal agenda against this, are thought as to be foreigners? But if you speak English pretty well, then you're not a foreigner, huh? Right? Do people know that a bunch of Mexicans used to live on the western part of the United States before a bunch of English people came in? I don't know. Shall we mention that to stop the implicit biases? All right, just me being funny. All right, so next one, please, Jen. Individuation. This is really, really important. And this strategy involves basically seeing the person as an individual, right? You have to see the person as an individual and sort of step away from that group perspective that we have and learn from the individual. And I can tell you from my personal experience, and this is obviously anecdotal data, the people that know me, I think I've broken a lot of their stereotypes about what it is to be a Puerto Rican, what it is to be a Puerto Rican woman. And we educate, so we do not overgeneralize. Focus on the individual, not on the group. And then a really important one, and Carlos Marin, who's another professor, a sociology professor, would love me for that one, and Chris too, perspective taking. What is perspective taking? One of the things that often gets confused with marginalized groups is feeling sympathy versus feeling empathy. Feeling sympathy is feeling bad for other people, right? You can feel bad for someone and say, oh, this person, they have such a bad life, that's horrible. But this is very different to showing some empathy. And empathy basically means putting yourself in that person's shoes. And once you do that with whatever marginalized group, stigmatized group that you're talking about, you will gain so much more perspective. And then those implicit biases start to become debiased. And already mentioned, increased opportunity for contact. One of my favorite strategies and one of my favorite things to tell people is face your fears. Learn, educate yourself. And the way that you educate yourself about other groups is just by placing yourself and increasing your opportunity for contact. And it sounds kind of silly in a way, but it actually really does work. And feel free to ask questions. It's more offensive when you don't ask questions and make assumptions than when you actually ask questions. And that is exactly how you educate about ethnicity. I am never offended when people ask me questions about my ethnicity, my race, my gender. That doesn't bother me. When the negative assumptions are made, that's when we get a little bit bothered by it. Then let's talk about this thing that we use. I think most of my psychology colleagues who teach have used this it's a cognitive strategy to make changes to create cognitive restructuring, and you can use it anywhere. This is like magic. Okay, what would you do? Do not enter, enter only. I love this. Why do I love this? Why do I love this? Because this is what we call a cognitive dissonance, right? And what is a cognitive dissonance? This is how I teach, and it works really, it's very effective. You don't tell the person that what they're saying is wrong. You basically provide evidence against what they are thinking. At a cognitive level, when you have those two thoughts that are at a dissonance, your brain is going to spend time fixing that dissonance. Let's say, for example, I am an atheist, yet I go to church every Sunday. What's going to happen there? That's a dissonance. Someone tells you, someone says, so you're going to make that dissonance work. And the way that you make it work is by seeking information to either go and believe in God or stop going to church, right? So that is the cognitive dissonance. It's a state of cognitive distress, psychological distress, that occurs in an individual when their behavior and beliefs or attitudes are contradicting each other. This state of inconsistency motivates the individual to look for more information or to change their attitudes and previously acquired knowledge. It's a very good, I'd say awesome strategy to educate about diverse subjects, because what we do not want to do as educators, as individuals, is to sound like know-it-alls, right? We don't want to do that. But how do you do it? You just throw in a comment, throw in a sentence that actually makes the person think about what they are doing, and that starts that cognitive dissonance going, and it's really effective. And I think that's it for me, right? Let's see. So we have some references, and then on the last page of the presentation, which we will share.
Oh, we will. Hold on.
Oh, well, don't worry. For all the attendees to the meeting, there's some resources that were put on the last slide.
Okay.
You don't have to share it. I think we're good I think we can do questions.
Okay.
Yes. So we have several lined up. I'm going to start with a couple that are in the chat, and I saw that both Wanda and Amanda had put up their hands too, which if you do have a question you want to ask on camera, you can certainly do that. But so it was a little back, but if you wouldn't mind, I'm just calling on Sarah O had a question. If you wouldn't mind asking the question you had in the chat.
Sure. My question was, how do we change this implicit bias, or is it even possible to change your implicit bias so that when you are in a challenging situation that is stressful and you have to make a quick decision? So my example was, is it possible for a police officer to really change their biases when they're in a situation where it's a possibly a violent situation, and is it possible for them not to jump to the worst conclusion about their suspect? Because I think that's part of their training, but maybe I'm wrong because I don't know actually.
A police officer who has been in close contact with different racial groups or different ethnic groups, who has worked with them, who has worked in the community, is less likely to engage in these implicit biases that a police officer in a place that doesn't have to work with. And when I say work with, not be a police officer, I say live in a diverse neighborhood, know the people at a personal level, and that changes the vision. And I know, I mean, I work in Lynn, and I hear a lot of stories, and there's some really good police officers and some really bad police officers. So I mean, you hear the stories, and those who do the right thing usually have more contact with diversity, with diverse groups, diverse races than others.
Sarah,
so that's something that was like a lifetime of experience though, right?
Right.
So,
and Sarah, but that's the thing, is that these things are learned, so they can be unlearned. And it goes back to what I can't even remember what Maria said, but I call it cognitively lazy. When we're cognitively lazy, we then continue to adhere to those implicit biases. You have to do work, and a lot of work, where you don't have that knee-jerk reaction, or your knee-jerk reaction is something very different than what it was before. But it takes you need to use your cognitive mechanisms and your conscious awareness to teach yourself to stop and breathe. Even stopping for 1 second can, I think, switch. Because I mean, too, Sarah, and they had this discussion last night, the police officers, there's evidence that when white people are acting equally as badly as Black people, they don't die, because probably the police said, wait, let me stop a minute and evaluate whether I need to use deadly force or not. You can train that. That can be definitely trained and learned. And you'd have to, put in the effort.
So there was another question too from the chat, if you wouldn't mind asking it, from Vanessa Mullins.
I'm kind of chatting away. I am really enjoying this presentation as far as reviewing and defining what these words mean, because I think over time we get away from these meanings, like what does implicit bias mean? Let's go over it. So I really will look forward to looking at the slides later as a cheat sheet to kind of review that. I think in general, I guess my basic comment is I really see the value of continuous education, which I believe today one of the purposes of this group was that we educate ourselves, but it really takes a lot of courage to want to do the work. And I think that's what I'm taking away, that it's difficult for some people because they don't want to do the work. But it seems like if as an individual and as a community, if we really take that seriously, you have to have courage to take those steps. I think that easier said than done. I think that we can make progress. We can make progress, but it's very difficult to unlearn biases. But I think, as you say in your presentation, we all have them. And personally, I mean, daily, I do reflect and I say, wow, maybe I could have handled this a different way. What can I do to resolve it? And I think it's those challenging questions, and I'm trying to manage my thoughts, makes my work product better. And I can see it in the evidence too, in my day-to-day interaction. So those are my thoughts.
Well, and cuz I just want to add that, like, there's like a combo I see, and we had this discussion before we came on. A great combination of courage and empathy goes a long way. Like Maria said, you have to face your fears. Sometimes that fear is yourself. And with courage and empathy, I do think that implicit biases, discrimination, prejudices can be overcome with those two things. And honesty, yes, Debbie.
So any other questions? I see visit.
Chris Bednar has his hand up too.
Oh, Chris.
So I was kind of thinking about your presentation. I'm wondering, we were like, so I think in many ways siloed, right? We kind of hear the same information, it's repeated, and we watch our same media, and we get our same signals reinforced by people who are similar to us, and we do that over and over, and that obviously kind of reinforces the bias that we have. I think that's kind of what you're getting at. But I guess I'm wondering, how do you disrupt that? And if you disrupt that, I mean, I guess one way of disrupting that would be like, I don't watch Fox News. It would be for me to sit and watch Fox News and try to disrupt the potential biases that I have. But I don't want to watch Fox News. I don't have any interest in watching Fox News. How do I interrupt the bias?
Chris, that's an excellent question, but you can't fall victim to one perspective, because you know very well that if you're going to debate a point, you have to have a contradicting point. And I know that some of us may hate watching Fox News, but maybe go to the different sources and get to the actual information. And it's that openness and that awareness of the fact that we all have our biases, right? And I don't want to get into the Fox News, the other one, because but you have to see all the perspectives. And cognitive growth, as we grow older and the myelination of the brain takes place and all those things happen, we move from this dual perspective, right? Black, I don't want to, a yes or no, to we understand like deeper moral development, deeper cognitive development, that there's not only one side to the story, right? And as we grow at a cognitive level, we have to understand that there are different perspectives. And that's exactly what we're trying to say. Yes, maybe not Fox News, but maybe some other source, so that you can have this cognitive dissonance in your head and try to figure it out for yourself.
And Chris, I'm just going to add, what I do is because I'm really with the empathy part. Like, I seek out other information from empathetic, intelligent people. And just, I am no Second Amendment person. Like, I don't even know why it exists. But I had students in my class. I had a student who had like a, Second Amendment t-shirt. I had already gotten to know him and had a relationship with him. So I sat down. I actually took time out of the beginning of the class and I'm like, can you help me understand this? Can you help me understand your support of the Second Amendment? What is behind it? And I did that another time with a student, and I actually did learn something. Now I'm with you. I'm not going to go to Fox News because I don't feel like that presentation of information is there to educate me. It's there to pontificate. It's there to browbeat. But, sort of to Maria's point, I like to try to find, other intelligent, rational, empathetic people who are different than me, or think differently than me. Those are the people I do seek out. So yeah, you got to be open. But for me personally, I'm not open to just any Tom, Dick, or Harry or Fox News.
And so it did look like Vanessa Bates had a question. Vanessa, if you wanted to ask your question.
Well, I just saw my typos on there. So I was just wondering, in terms of looking at how invisible people can make you feel in terms of valuing your presence, and how we can kind of deal with that in terms of from a biased perspective. We've been having lots of conversations about cordiality and reaching across the aisle and having teachable moments, but then we are still dealing with the oppressiveness of not being seen and not being valued. And I, as a Black woman, I don't know how you can't not miss me or see me, but yet there will be people that will look right by you, look right past you, bump into you. Even this morning on the news, I was listening to the fact that Marcus Smart was talking about his racist experience that he had here in Massachusetts in front of the garden with this woman crossing the street with her child and trying to say, watch out, hurry up quickly, and got, racial slurs hurled at him. So when we are talking about that, that does make an impact on you, because it lets you know that, you are not valued, you are not seen in that same equality. I know that I'm a valued person because I know my upbringing has nothing to do with my education, but I know that as we've been talking these last few days, that there's somebody that lifted me up generationally, and thank goodness that generation was able to survive and sustain in order for me to be here. So I know where I am come from. I know my value, I know my worth, but just dealing with it from other people's perspectives. I guess I was looking at it from that lens.
So Vanessa, how do you see implicit bias working in that scenario?
It's Vanessa Bates, right?
Yes, I met Vanessa Bates, not my cousin Vanessa.
Oh, there's three of us on here. So it's kind of tough, and I think for me, I'm looking at it. I am sharing a conversation with someone else, so we actually haven't had a chance to kind of touch base back on it. But I'm looking in terms of that avoidance, like you're seeing me, but you're not really seeing me, and the bias that goes into, do you see me as a threat? Do you see me as, someone that can engage with you on your level? I'm just wondering, it's kind of hard to answer that from that perspective of what it is.
But here's the part of the point, I think, Vanessa, is, again, Maria and I are from a psychological perspective, which means we focus on the individual, and you can only control yourself.
Of course.
The people that you are talking about that don't see you and dismiss you need to be here, but my challenging my implicit bias doesn't make other people then no longer have implicit bias. Even I can be who I am, right? who I am. For some people, if again, they have courage and they're empathetic, can interpret me as, well, she doesn't fit the stereotype of a Black person. She doesn't fit the stereotype of a woman, but I'm going to try to see her in the way that she is. But I don't have control over that. I don't have control over how they see me. But that doesn't stop me from being who I am, because somebody might get challenged. Somebody might see, you know, a Black woman with a PhD who loves alternative music and watches sports and drinks beer and not cocktails as, oh my gosh, I didn't know that person could exist. But it doesn't, training somebody with implicit bias, they have to be willing to be open to it. But I don't think it should stop you from being who you are.
Oh, of course not.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting, like you can, you know, like I said, you know, go sit in the train station and I can have the seat next to me be empty. And the moment I get up, then somebody sits down. You know, it's that kind of stuff that it's a triggering thing. And I guess because I'm consciously aware of, you know, maybe they didn't want to sit down at the time, but, you know, it really does, you know, kind of make you second guess and kind of make you go back and think twice. So like, do I smell? Is my breath stink? You know, or whatever. But the fact that as soon as I get up and move from that seat, then that same person that was standing up down would sit down. So these are things that we are all, you know, like, maybe it's a trigger, maybe it's not, but, you know, just walking through a park, sitting on your step, you know, being cordial and saying hello to coworkers here at work and not even have somebody respond back to you and say hi. And I'm like, well, you know, don't have a good day then, you know, but at the same time, it's that kind of stuff that sits with you. So in some aspects, maybe times you don't want to be putting yourself out there or reluctant to say good morning first. Because of the, not the rub or just the disregard for your politeness. That's what I'm also looking at in that vein too.
Can I say something, Vanessa, and I know you very well, you're an awesome, and thank you for sharing your experience, because yeah, I think at this point, we're all very frustrated about the way that some groups, some racial groups are treated. And I think Jen and I were having this conversation, and we were laughing, and we were telling ourselves, yeah, there are people who are going to hate us because of who we are. And I'm not going to let that stop me from being who I am. I've been kicked out of the parking lot at North Shore Community College many times because they either think I'm a student or I don't know what's going on. So if I let this affect how I treat my students, how I treat the people, and I guess I have to have rough skin, right? And maybe I've grown it. I stopped caring about that, right? And there's always going to be someone who's going to hate you for what you are. But I kind of move past it. And you know what? I think that the beauty of life is that as time goes by, life has a way of showing people, I don't know, maybe this is me not being very psychological at all, of showing those people a different perspective. And that's going to happen, but I don't let it get to me as much as possible, right? But it is hurtful, and I completely understand and empathize with you because it's awful. But I say, you know, they don't want to acknowledge you, you be louder.
And Jen just directed me to Colin Michael Broder, who had a very good question. If you wouldn't mind asking it on camera, and if you don't in a moment, then I will read it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Harris and Dr. Vazquez. I really appreciate this quite a bit. And, you know, one of the things that came up for me is I was just thinking that one of my workplace colleagues, as an organization, we did the race IAT, the implicit attitudes test. And so one of my workplace colleagues, who's a white male, got the result that he had a moderate preference for other white people. And when we were processing that as a group, I mean, it didn't really surprise him at all that came up. But unfortunately, it was kind of like, you know, that awareness is valuable, but it didn't really translate into kind of any actionable steps beyond that. And I know, Dr. Harris, you might have alluded to this in just a moment, like just, you know, what you said earlier, that we can only really engage people that are willing to be engaged. But I guess my question is kind of like, how do you take somebody's awareness once they recognize they do have that implicit bias? I guess, like, how do you work with somebody who's really not quite ready yet to maybe translate that into the counter stereotyping or more of those actionable steps? So how do you kind of nudge somebody along who's they admit they have the bias, but they're not quite ready yet to kind of like dive a little deeper and kind of like, you know, create more experiences that challenge that bias?
Yeah, Michael, that's a great question. And it sort of goes back to, we were just having a very brief conversation before we all got on. And one of the things I know I use is when I get that, and I don't need a very big window. I don't need a very big window for somebody to be open to listening. Somebody was talking about storytelling. I do think telling your own personal story is very, very powerful in challenging people's implicit bias. And to what Maria says, not telling people that they're wrong, you know, giving them information that counters what they are thinking. Because once you start telling people are wrong, their defenses go up and they don't want to hear what you're saying anymore. You know, I had a student, and he was a white male student, but he had converted to a specific religion. And he came into my office, and I'd had him an intro to psych, and he came in and was like, I don't understand this thing about privilege. I don't have any privilege. I grew up poor, and, you know, he is of this now minority faith in the United States. And, you know, his partner is a person of color. And I said, okay, let me tell you about my privilege. And I said, I am a Black woman, but I have class privilege. I grew up middle class. I grew up with certain attitudes that gave me a head start. I'm not a bad person for it. I didn't, you know, I don't use it in a bad way, but I have it. Him hearing that story really helped him say, oh, maybe I had the idea of privilege all wrong. I didn't say you're an idiot, or gosh, you know, why, you know, of course there's privilege. What are you talking about? I just stopped back and said, let me give you some data. Let me give you some different data that you might not have experienced before. So I think, especially if there is that little bit of a window, sharing your story as data, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great question.
It looked like Chris Bender has his hand up if he still wants to ask a question.
I'm so intimidated. This is my assistant dean, and he's asking me all these questions.
I truly don't. I just didn't take my hand down. I'm sorry. Am I off there? I'll shut up.
Do we have any other questions that anybody would like to ask?
I just want to, Dr. Mullins mentioned coaching. And I think I hadn't even thought about that, but, you know, Vanessa, I think, like, if working with somebody to help you challenge your ideas, I mean, I think that's a brilliant idea. Is, you know, maybe even like Chris, to your point, you know, maybe if you don't want to watch Fox News, is there somebody else that you can talk, even if you think the same way, to take you through a cognitive process of challenging your own thinking? Do you know what I mean? I love that idea, Vanessa. I love it. Oh yeah. I'm sorry, Diane. Yes, the 4 agreements, a big fan. You know, don't take anything personally, you know, take responsibility for your own, you know, behavior. I do think those principles do go a long way. Thank you, Diane. Yes, impeccable with your thoughts. Love the 4 agreements. God, I love the 4 agreements.
It seems like a lot of people have been commenting how wonderful your presentation is in the chat, which I have everyone's email. So as long as Jen and Maria don't mind, I'd be happy to send you materials afterwards. Does anyone have a last question or thought they wanted to share? I will say with that, just please join me in thanking Dr. Jennifer Harris and Dr. Maria Del Mar Vazquez. Awesome. And if you want another forum event, there's one in about 3.5 hours with Dr. Andre Bennett, who is both a alumni, a reverend, and a local social activist. But otherwise, thank you so much, Jen and Maria, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming and listening to us.